Oh, yeah.
Okay. We should be live now. Now to see, let me make sure that I'm set up over here, Sensei. We'll wait just a moment, make sure everything's good, and then we can get started. Okay. So I'm going to be watching incoming comments and questions over here while we make sure that the stream is good. Okay, so good. I've got confirmation that the microphone's working. So that's good. Yeah. Oh, that's a great cup. I love that. Where did you get that? Cool. All right. 10:01. So we can actually get started, Sensei, if you're ready.
Okay.
Everything good for you?
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here today. I feel like I know you quite well, but I don't know that everybody who's a follower of the Burinkan channel knows you. So, to get started, would you mind just giving us a sense of who you are, what your background is,
Okay.
for those people that don't know those things?
I've been training since about 74, 75. I studied Showa Shobukan, Okinawan Gojou with Shion John Roseberry for about 40 years. And now I'm doing my own thing. So I've been training for about 50.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what Shorei Shobukan Gojuru is like?
Okay, Shoei Kan was under Taguchi, Sakichi Taguchi, and my teacher was in the military, so he trained with him over there. He also trained Judo and Aikido.
Gotcha.
And so that's where we got Shoei Kan. Later on, Roseberry Shihan went with Masanobu Shinjo, and so that's where we got the Shobukan from.
Shobukan.
And so he just put them together, Shoei Shobukan.
Mm-hmm.
But it's based pretty much on Kiso Kumite and the Bunkais of the Taguchi lineage.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So you mentioned also Judo and Aikido. Can you tell us more about that?
So he trained Judo. He was in the Air Force, and he went to England about 56, and he started Judo there. And then he got out of the Air Force and joined the Marines. And then he continued his studies when he got deployed to Okinawa. And he continued Judo, and that's where he met Taguchi Sensei. And then I think when he was getting out, he was stationed in California, and he studied Aikido under, I believe it was Robert Tan. And so, the Judo and Aikido was part of our karate training, and he also taught them separately.
Okay.
So we never got any rank from them, but
Sure.
it was just part of, you should know how to throw and
Yeah.
do things like that. So, yeah.
So I understand he was either like high ranked or quite a competitor in Judo, Shihan.
Yeah, he was, I believe it was 1964. He was what do you call, alternate, and he won some championships, and he was quite the Judo player.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes he would say that he taught karate to support the Judo because that was his first love.
Gotcha.
And then karate was his second. So.
Oh, all right. So polyamorous, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Favorite technique for Judo he had?
Uchimata, left side.
Left side.
Yeah. And he always used to say, you have to have 20 ways to get into it, right? Mm-hmm. Entries. So you can throw it all day long, and even if they know you're going to throw it, it's just setting it up and doing it in different ways, which really relates to the karate part of it. Some of the things we're going to discuss and looking at things differently.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So having a favorite technique is not bad, so long as you can get to that technique from just about any starting point.
Yeah. And it's a deep study. I mean, it's kind of developing the skill of doing something in one way versus the skill of doing the same thing in many ways.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Nice. So you see that. It sounds like that's a direct correlation to how you think about karate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the katas are one application.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I can't imagine what the kata would look like if you showed every variation of every technique in the same kata, right? So I think that's our study, right? Not just the practice of, And, like Geek Sci 1, the head block, it's like, well, that's one application, but now you have to study different ways, different energies, where you are, go from where you are. It's kind of like welding. Everybody learns to weld flat, but then there's vertical and there's horizontal, and then there's pipe welding. So you have the skill of welding flat, but you don't have the skill of these other things. But it's the same thing. It's all welding.
So welding a pipe is more advanced then?
Because it does all of the, it does flat, it does vertical, it does horizontal, so it does all the positions. So they'll call it a 6G. And that means that, at an angle, maybe at a 45-degree angle, so now you're welding under, horizontal, vertical, all those things. Yeah. So I think about that like the karate techniques. It's like you should be able to do them a head block from pretty much anywhere, right? If you're stepping to the left or right.
Not just from
back.
here?
No?
Okay.
That's the beginning.
That's the beginning, right.
Yeah,
right.
it just shows you what it is.
Yeah.
Here's a concept. And how do you apply that in different circumstances? So, the questions, what if, well, yeah, but what if this and what if that? And it's kind of like, well, anytime you change the circumstances, you change the response. So
a change in circumstances dictates a change in response.
Yeah. So anyway.
No, I like that. I like the engineering analogies because I think engineering is often a study of the physical world, and the body is a very complex machine, and you have those two machines colliding for different purposes, and I think engineering analogies tend to work quite well. So that's a bit about your the launching point from your teacher, what he was able to give you. Can you tell us more about how you've evolved from there, either after you moved away and studied more on your own, or cross-trained, or furthered your own studies?
Yeah, I've always tried to look at those things positively. When I moved, I probably was maybe a need-on. I moved to Florida from Nebraska, started teaching at a YMCA, and it was kind of a different situation where you didn't have the teacher standing behind you in case you messed up. You couldn't turn around and ask the question, so you had to figure it out for yourself, right? And that's part of a humbling experience where you have to tell somebody, it's like, I really don't know, but I'll try and figure it out, or I'll try and get the answer for you, right?
It's pretty rare in the martial arts to be that honest about what you know and don't.
But and I think that helps you grow too, because it's we talk about the traditions, lineages in the organizations, and while they promote and preserve the arts, they're also based on the perceptions, the preferences, the abilities, and the intent of who you get the information from. And so, I think the organization of lineages, traditions, they ultimately become contingent on the people who, are
carrying them forward,
carry it forward. So, it's like the stories, the poems, reading a book like The Art of War, and you read it every year, and each year it means something different to you. It's like, well, it was always there in front of you. So,
the book didn't change.
Yeah.
I changed.
Yeah, and so that's the thing too. I think sometimes we don't need to learn more new things. We just need to look at the things we already think we know differently, right? And get a different perspective. That's why when I left and I went to the YMCA's, I continued my study, training with other judo and karate, Gojou instructors, different styles, Aikido, and it's just their perspective, but it helps you to kind of get out of your own box, right, and see things differently. So sometimes when we're saying, oh, that's not the way we do it, or that's not the way I was taught, it's kind of like, well, one way doesn't work for everything, right? So that goes back to, different circumstances, different.
So, Kevin sent in a question about some of your aha moments. when you were training with some of these other teachers, can you remember some of those aha moments from the specific other people that you had interactions with?
Ultimately, I think they helped me, how do I say, get outside my own box. They helped me to give myself permission to explore.
Gotcha.
And I think sometimes, when we're only in one place with one instructor, not that it's a bad thing,
Right.
but I don't think that any one person has everything.
Right.
There's some people who, we're talking about abilities and intent, how you perceive it or how you perceive somebody else's experiences, what your teacher gave you.
Yeah.
You don't, we kind of get into pedagogy and andragogy where I don't know enough to ask a good question, right? So sometimes, you've said this in class, it's kind of, you've done 10 reps. You don't know enough to ask a good question, right? So, yeah. So are they your perceptions or other people's perceptions? What are your preferences? Because in the 5A, you teach, all the 5 systems, but then you also specialize in different systems.
Right.
So what are my preferences? And I think through constant repetition that you're going to find I'm a better kicker, I like to punch, I like to trap or grapple or whatever. So you're going to find your kind of specialty, what you do well. And I think the key is to make sure that you don't just teach everybody your specialty, but and so I feel like Roseberry Shihan gave us that. We're a well-rounded program where like, hey, sometimes you're going to hit. He was a Golden Glove boxer. He did a lot of things. He goes, what's better than hitting somebody? It's like, well, hitting them and grabbing them and then throwing them on the ground, right? Not that you have to go down with them,
right?
But, or trapping them or arm bar or something like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he always used to mention fight like you have a tuxedo on. You don't want to get dirty.
Oh,
right?
nice.
So
don't go down to the ground with them if you can avoid it, right?
Yeah, take care of business.
Yeah.
However you have to take care of it, and but always be aware that your surroundings and things like that.
I say this only tongue in cheek. I mean, you are probably the most modest and most humble, skilled, experienced person I know. It seems like your exposure to these other things helped you develop that because you saw more possibilities, more skills, more aspects of the infinite game of fighting, right? And that is for people who are not familiar with the Dunning-Krueger effect. The idea is that when you know a little about a topic, you overestimate your knowledge in that domain. And when you're quite expert in a topic or in a field of study, you realize how little you know. And it humbles you and it makes you less likely to overestimate your knowledge. And I do think that that is one of those things that I think you embraced, and I think it makes you kind of one of those unknown experts, relatively unknown experts in the field.
Those aha moments. I mean, it's kind of like when that light goes off and you've been looking at something and you see it in a different way. And then, you go on YouTube or something and you realize that somebody else posted something 10 years ago that was the idea that you just had an aha moment. So I kind of look at things like there's really nothing new under the sun, right? But so that's why you need to open up and have an open mind and look at other things. It's kind of humbling when you're like, oh, I found this new technique and it's my little secret, right? And then you realize, well, they've been doing that for 100 years. So we just didn't know about it, right? So the Dunning-Krueger effect is like, I don't know how much I don't know. That's good stuff.
Well, you touched on this already, and it was going to be one of my questions about, you often mentioned kind of this 4 keyword formula: perception, preference, ability, and intent. And is that something that you internalize as a reminder to stay humble or to stay looking, or is it something else? Is it, why did you come up with that? Is that your original concept, or?
I believe it was original to me.
Gotcha.
So the way I put it together, but I'm always looking for concepts and principles and formulas to guide my training. So it's kind of like, what am I doing, right? What are my goals that I'm trying to achieve? So if I just do this one day and do that another day, sometimes when we're drilling, it's almost mindless. It's conditioning and it's a workout. We had a good sweat. And we say, man, we had a great time, right?
Right.
And it's like, but what did you learn, or what was the goal of that, And so I think like in curriculum and things like that, you have to have a perspective of what you're trying to accomplish. And then the preferences play into it, but you have to get outside of your comfort zone every once in a while.
Yeah.
And then abilities. I've never been a high kicker, so I don't have anything against Taekwondo or some other systems, or I've never been a great grappler or this or that, right? But I think you have to study those things, and so you have to have the whole kind of the bigger picture, right? And train your strengths, but also train your weaknesses. So I think that each drill should have a purpose. It's like, what are you trying to accomplish? And at the end of the day, you have a great analogy about body development, because you have to be able to train, right? So you got to get in shape to get in shape, right? And then body coordination, right? Because you might have to move here or there, or you don't know where you're going to move, but you have to have the agility and ability to do that. And so, then there's the intent. I mean, some people talk about, and none of these are wrong or whatever. It's just who you are, or what you're needing to feed yourself. And that's kind of what the learning to learn thing is. Like, how do you feed yourself and how do you feed others, right? And what's the intent? If you're there because you like to do kata and it's the aesthetics of kata, then that's great. But if you're there to learn how to defend yourself, and then of course there's levels of defense. It's like, how far do you want to go? Is it combative, or is it just how much resistance, right? Is it cooperative? Those types of things. So Mark Wiley, Shifu Mark Wiley, talks about you can always level up, but you can never, or level down, but you can never level up. So it's kind of like, well, if I'm not prepared for certain things, then
I won't rise to the occasion.
Yeah, I can't rise to the occasion. I don't have the ability. Right?
Yeah.
So anyway.
So Sensei, you often talk to me about the intuitive versus other methods of thinking about things, and there's a kind of the competency model, the knowing and doing, not understanding and doing, not understanding and not doing, right? So I think of the intuitive as being doing, but maybe forgetting how you got there, or not thinking about it as you're doing it. Maybe you can recreate that as a teacher, but maybe as you're executing the activities, they're without conscious thought. Tell me more about what you think about when you say intuitive.
Like the perception that it's how we filter information. And so we filter it by usually our environments, where we grew up, how we grew up, what are the things were happening. When we look back in history, it's one of the reasons we should go back to the old. It's like, what is violence about? And it's pretty much been the same through history, right? So we talk about the OODA loop. It's observing and orienting. So I think the first level, we're all visual oriented. And so we look at things. And so we start training from back here. And it's kind of like, that's why we go back, so I can see it coming and I can get used to it, right? And I can start programming that. It's like, okay, he's this fast. And
so training the eyes?
Yeah, training the eyes and how you filter it. What's happening, right? I'm trying to figure out, is it something I need to deal with or something I can move away from, right? And so that's the fight or flight, this or that. I have a couple more. It's fight or flight. It's appease. You try to get along, right?
Sure.
And then there's the freeze, and then you decide what's going to happen. So, but I think sight is the first one. And then I think we go to, the hearing, of course. But as we get closer, when we're training far apart, we're training the eyes, I think. But when we get closer, we start, as soon as we engage and we touch or we bridge, however you want to say it, we start going tactile. We start feeling. So then I can close my eyes, because as long as I have touching you, I know it's the right hand or the left hand or the shoulder or whatever it is. We're not visual anymore, because we're so close and it's become so quick that we're reacting tactily, right? And then the intuitive is, I think, with a lot of training, you start to realize, well, if he's moving this way, those are the opportunities. I think, people ask, well, how do you set up a throw, or how do you do this? It's like, well, first you got to be connected. You have to be engaged, right? Because throws are tight. Right? There's, but it's just knowing that if you step to the right, well, then you got to step back to the left, or if you step back, then I can come in, right? So, we talk about the techniques, which one's more important, and it's kind of like, well, the one you need, right, at that time, in that circumstance, at that moment, right? So it's very hands-on and in the moment training, intuitive, right? And I don't know if there's any real way to explain it, but I'm a very, so people have different learning styles, listening, hearing, visual, whatever. I'm a very tactile type person. So a lot of times I try to correct people by hands-on. If I can touch you, I can feel where you're moving from first, right? If your body's unified or, engaged or whatever it is, right? So in teaching kata, like maybe the Sanshin and the Tensho, if those are actually the pillars of everything else, then I think even though they're not as have as many movements or speed or this or that, but it teaches you how to push and pull. It teaches you how to do certain things that you're going to need down the road. And I think sometimes people misinterpret it. It's like, I'm teaching you this because you're going to need it, right? It's like taking a backpacking trip, right? It's like, you're going to need food, so you better learn about food, right? You're going to need
Start
to
a
learn
fire.
first aid in case you get hurt. So they're preparatory things, right? And then there's general things, and then there's the specifics. So, but I think, the intuitive is just, you can do it in one class. It's not something that it does take years to develop, but you can start teaching it right from the get-go, right? You can say, so we have a thing where we train solo, right? Solo stationary. Then we start solo moving, and then the next thing to do is that's you're testing out and self-correcting the kihon, right? And then you touch hands with somebody, use a partner stationary and moving, and so that's kind of the process or the progression of how you, I think, that it happens. And then once you touch hands, then you start moving around, because it's hard to find. Number one, the most important part, one of the aha moments, is that you have to have a partner that you can trust, that can feed you and you can feed them. It's hard to find a partner sometimes. Prearranged drills, choice drills, random drills, prearranged. It's hard to have somebody just to feed you with the same energy at the same target every time, right? Because they start varying off. It's like, well, I can't make my block work or my receiving because you're not giving me the right. And
consistent
so I think
energy.
that's what kata is about. Kata shows you one interpretation, and so I'm working on that interpretation until I develop enough skill and enough intuition and tactile, whatever, that I can change it. The energy changes, then I can shift a little bit or move. Right. So that's why we look at applications sometimes as outside, in the middle, left, right, forward, back. I need to be able to do, per se, the 8 directions. Right. With a head block. And then,
I need 20 entries for my Uchimata, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we were talking this morning before the taping about how failing safely is something that's an important concept, right? You come from structural engineering, I come from software engineering, but the overlaps are tremendous.
Yeah.
And in software engineering, we talk about doing things in a very agile way. And it's only because in the digital world, you can rebuild things without tremendous cost that it would take to tear down a structure and rebuild it to make a fix. So we use development environments and testing environments to do all of this, failing safely and quickly. Try a thing. Oh, I don't know. I'm experimenting. I'm using a new technology.
Yeah.
We try something. We move through that very quickly. Find out if it works or not. And if it works, we promote it to production. And if not, we fix it. But the laboratory of the dojo is that place where we want to fail safely. And you got to have the right kind of partner, right? You want to be punched by a buddy.
Yeah.
Not your first punch
Yeah.
should be in the dojo that you take in the mouth, right?
Yeah, and you have a good way of putting it. And it's kind of like if you're taking it from the kata and you're doing the head block in Geeksai or the punch, you want to succeed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
that's the goal.
It doesn't give much of a learning experience because it's like I win, it's over, right? But that usually doesn't happen in life. So planning to fail really starts to get you outside of the box, and you start looking at different ways, to accomplish that, and also realize the skills that you may need to work on, right? So that's how you set up your drills and different things. Like, well, what if this happens? What if I fail?
Yeah.
Right. So then we learn a lot of the things in your principal development book. If we fail, we need to work around obstructions, right? Am I moving him, or am I stepping around him? I'm moving myself. Is he moving around me or trying to move, So there's all these scenarios that come into play, and it just, the permutations just blow up, right? I mean, it's just like, so.
It's infinite, I like to think. Yeah.
And I think that's what the kumite, applying the applications, it's like we have drills where we just walk up to each other, and it's like you go from where you're at. And I think that's real important to say, well, I wasn't ready, or I wasn't set up, or I wasn't, so that's where the prearranged, the choice, and the random drills come in. And I think you have to practice all three of those, right? And then you can go back and refine it, or what did I miss, or what do I need to work on? So, there's, again, learning to learn, how, if I always do these three steps, this process, it will help me to work through it.
Yeah. So there's an underlying theme of kind of progress in what you're describing, right? It's not doing the same white belt drills for 50 years to be then, as I was told, you do the kata until the kata does you. When you need it, the skills will manifest and it'll just show up when you need it. And in some ways that's true, and for some people, and that can happen, but it feels very haphazard to me as opposed to a logical progression. So what you described to me sounds like shuhari, and kind of embracing that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the pedagogy. And, when you're teaching children, they're dependent on you to lead them and structure their learning process, right? And so if they don't have addition, subtraction, multiplication, they all build on each other. But when you're from an andrological perspective, you have adults coming in and they already have real life experiences. They already have all that, those precursors that they're going to need. And so, they become responsible for their own training, and then you can clean it up. But if they don't do the reps, if they don't have the consistency, it's kind of like you said before, it's like trying to mold wet clay. It's like it just keeps, so they're responsible for doing the stuff. That kind of gets into the testing on a schedule every 3 months or every 6 months or every year or whatever. It's like, well, some people are going to make it, some aren't, but then we start past, like, well, you have the pattern down, but do you have the skill of, right? Do you have any proficiency in what you're doing? And so just my opinion, but if you promote those people, you create weak links that you're going to have to fix later, or they're going to end up saying, well, this didn't work because he didn't, teach me right, or whatever. I need to go study something else. Right. So, yeah, it's tough. And looking at it from, there's a lot of people out there, you're one of them, that look at teaching from an educator's perspective rather than this is the way I was taught, so this is the way we're going to do it. So sometimes when you join an organization, I understand it's kind of like, well, you got to change your kata and everything because this is the way we do it, right? But I kind of went the other way where I try to meet the student at where they're at. So, if you can demonstrate to me, where's the evidence, right? And if it's acceptable, then we start from there, right? If you already know how to block, and then I'm not going to try and teach you how to block again, and maybe some few details or whatever. But like you're saying, it's kind of like I don't want to always. It's okay to use as warm-ups and things like that, and to clean them up or look at them and say, hey, what could I be doing differently? Or, but you really need a partner for that. So there's kind of theory, right? And then it's like, well, how do I prove those theories?
Right.
And it's like, well, you got to go hands-on, right? And you got to have somebody that you can trust enough. We train a lot together. We get a few bumps and bruises here and there, but the faster it gets, the more chaotic. You realize that you are in that intuitive state. It's like, oh, I should have done this, and I should have. It's like, yeah, you don't.
Too late.
Do that. That if you're thinking about what you should have done, you're probably getting hit again. Right?
Sensei, you used the word study a few times, and I, sorry, at some point in my own training, I thought very specifically about the difference between training and study. And for myself, I think of training as kind of doing and repeating the things that I was taught, and I think of study as the part of this training that's my responsibility. Do you use different way of thinking about that or talking about that? And also, how do you impress upon a student their role in the process and their responsibility? Because I don't know that students realize their own responsibility in the process.
Yeah, I think they come to be fed, and they come to a dojo and they see an instructor on the floor and they figure he's the expert. You go to school, you have a professor or teacher, you figure, oh, they know everything, right? So yeah, I think you have to be knowledge, information, however you want to look at it, memorization. Those things don't guarantee that you develop skills, right?
Right.
So you have to practice them, and you have to be able to demonstrate them and against different types of scenarios and things like that. So I kind of think that everybody comes in and saying, well, I went to college, I learned it, I took the test, so I know this stuff. And then we all know that you get out in the real world and it's like, oh, throw the book away because that's not the way it works, right? But so, thinking, it's just a different way of thinking. I think you just have to put it into practice.
Yeah.
But the practice is so it kind of gets me into a lot of the terminologies, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes they limit you and sometimes they help you.
Right.
And it's like we're so kind of fixated sometimes on certain terms or the kanji or the hanji, right? And it's like, well, it really doesn't mean that.
Yeah.
Or, well, this guy said this is what it is, but it came from here and that's not what he was talking about, right? So, you have to study. You can't just, you can't ride on the coattails of your teachers forever, right? You have to, at some point,
become your own man.
Yeah.
Or woman.
Yeah. And it's okay, like you were saying earlier, it's okay to make mistakes, challenge it. That's why, kind of the Kokonden thought that I'm trying to get across is that, look at everything.
Yeah.
And it's just be able to agree to disagree, be able to have people who are have more experience or less experience than you. I teach when you watch people, sometimes your students going up and down the floor, they teach you things. It's like, oh, that's where that's how that goes in the kata, or that's how one way to apply it, or something like that. So, you know, you're constantly switching back between being a student and a teacher. Right.
Nice.
One moment you're telling them how to do it, next minute you're watching them and you're learning. So you have maybe 20 people on the floor. You have 20 examples of either how to do it or how not to do it.
Yeah. So with what I completely agree with what you just said, Sensei, and I find it a little frustrating that there's a tradition of leaning on the idea that you learn as you teach, therefore you should just teach. Practitioners should just teach. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, again, I go back to the educator model. There's a great book out, Understanding by Design.
Thank you,
and it's
Sensei.
backwards planning. I think you really need to look into how people learn and what you're learning. You know, the curriculums, it kind of gets into that which technique or way of doing something is the way it's supposed to be, or more important.
Sure.
Right. So, you know, through time, I know Miyagi Sensei taught different people different katas, and so I asked myself, well, which one was more important? Was it Super Impe or this one? Or, you know, and then they got together. So, or which technique is more advanced than another technique? And it's like, so the difference between closing my hand and opening my hand, and it's like, you know, our interpretation of advanced is linking skill sets together, right? So if I have multiple points of contact, I'm doing multiple things with the same technique. And so that's just stepping back and saying, you know, if I start at your hand and I want to go for the other hand, it's like, well, what are the opportunities? Like, well, I can pin, I can hit before I get to the hand. So, you know, going from A to B, there's a lot of things in the way, right? Or obstructions or whatever. And so by looking at it that way, it's like a technique doesn't do one thing, although it can, but it can do many things, right? So now that it just blows up. So, it's.
Thank you, Sensei. We had a question come in from Randall over at Kung Fu Conversations related to what you were just discussing a moment ago. He asked the question of how do you meet the student where they're at and still maintain a set curriculum and be honest to the individual and do credit to the individual, the class, and the system. And good morning, by the way, Randall said.
Good morning. Thank you for the question. I have no idea.
Right. How do you balance those concerns for the individual and for the tradition? So there's you know, the individual is the current avatar, the potential hope for the system you're planting in that student and you're investing in that student. And how do you meet that student's needs, but also try to carry on the other things that maybe they're not going to be good at, maybe they don't understand yet, those things.
Yeah, you know, so I'll start out with the law of individual differences, right? Not everybody's going to get the gift per se, or learn to do things maybe as well as other one. I mean, we have elite competitors, we have elite this and that, and then you have the guys that go out and do it every day, and you know, they're not elite, but you know, so everybody comes from a different walk. So meeting the student where they're at, I think it's being honest about these are if you're the expert or they're coming to you, then they're kind of entrusting you with their welfare and their teaching and what they learn. And so I think you need to be honest with them and say, not tear them down, but you know, your head block's over here, or this is different than this, or the structure's wrong, or whatever. So I think that's what we start with. You know, here's the shape, here's the form of it, here's the structure of it, right? And then we start applying that in different scenarios.
Sure.
And so I think, like I was mentioning before, the testing every 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is, it doesn't do, I don't feel like it does anybody any good. You test when you're ready. And so testings are really kind of a ritual. There's nothing wrong with them. But instructors should already know if the students
Ready.
have met the curriculum or not in a satisfactory way. And there's nothing wrong with if they're not quite ready, but they're starting to get it, right? And that's it. Are you working? Are you doing this? And if that's their best, if they're working out 2 or 3, 4 or 5 hours a week on their own to try and get it. But I also find that the people who have natural abilities sometimes don't do as well as the people who don't have natural abilities because they work harder.
Wow.
So,
yeah,
you know, and at the end of the day, you know, your teacher or whoever is not going to be there in the alley with you when you have to use it. So you have to take it seriously. And you know, what is your investment? What is your dedication?
Yeah.
And so those are all the things that I look at. Are you dedicated? Because this may sound bad, but do you really want to waste a lot of time on somebody who just wants to talk about it and somebody, you know, who disrupts class, or they're really not that interested? It's just maybe that they say they train in something or do something, or and if they want to be a part of a club or a group or something like that, there's nothing wrong with that. But they also have to be honest and so if they're not getting promoted like this other person who's working, you know, a lot of hours and getting it down. So that's kind of the thing about rank. You know, you have black belts in one system that wouldn't be black belts in another system, right? And it's not because it's they're doing different techniques or different this or that. It's just because they haven't developed the skills. And so I think it is all about developing a skill based on your limitations, whether they're physical or whatever, or there's a lot of online classes now. I don't think that they're bad. I mean, in the beginning, it was like, oh, it's not traditional or it's not a dojo. That, well, you still have to, I believe, meet the instructor, right? So we can teach you the patterns, the shapes, and all that. And you can use the makiwari or different types of wooden dummy of that to practice. But nothing is like, we were talking earlier about simulators. There's nothing like the real thing. I mean, you can fly a plane in a simulator, but it's not the same thing. Plus, if you crash, it's kind of like, oh well, I just put the start. You know, it's like gaming, right? Like just reset. It's like there's no reset. So anyway, I kind of got off the subject, but yeah, I think just being honest with them and making sure that you know, at this point in my life where I have more days behind me than I do ahead of me, I'm looking for people to carry on some of the information that I have. And so that kind of gets into inside students and outside students, who's serious, who's not. You know, why is he getting more than I am? You know, a while back there was accelerated classes. And it's like, well, those were basically for people who were really serious about studying, right? And the other ones were like, well, what about me? It's like, well, you know, start practicing.
You also have the give us $5,000, we'll give you a black belt a year. It's almost like buying indulgences from the church, right? It's
read
like,
the material.
I want the thing and I've got the money. So
read the material, take the test. But that's the thing, you know, in college or school, you don't pass the test, you don't get the grade. So it's just kind of like.
So Sensei, you know, it seems like in that discussion, curriculum ties to testing and testing ties to certification. Certification is all about these multicolored belt ranks and that kind of thing. What are your thoughts about the pros and cons of what the ranking system does to what you teach, how you should teach, how people approach the training and stuff?
Yeah, we mentioned earlier that which kata is the most advanced, and you know, we go from geek side to super Empe. It's like I honestly think that you could teach super Empe when you break the katas down by how many actual techniques they have, not the repeated ones, right? Geek side might have 7 or 8, depending on how you break it down. You get to Kurumfa, it might have 12 because there's so many repetitions of the same technique. But I think that's the idea, the concept. It's like I'm doing it from the left to right, forward, back, I turn around. So it kind of gives us that thing about, yeah, you should be able to do it from any place. And then the breathing and keeping all that. So I don't believe it's about the kata or the technique. I believe it's about developing the skills of that theme. So Geeksai has a theme, Saifa has a theme, but you'll see a lot of these techniques in other katas, the stance may change. So I punch in Zen, I punch in Shiko, I punch in Niko, Ashi. So yeah.
But that's maybe telling you a different story about range or pressure.
Absolutely.
Not necessary.
Yeah. You know, with there may be 20, 30, 40, 50 stances, depends on what style, but there's only 4 categories. It's either your weight's up, your weight's down, your weight's forward, your weight's back. And then you have all these labels that say, oh, your foot's got to be 20 degrees. It's like, well, you know, those are examples that we use to help students, to give them some kind of a goal to work for, right? But, you know, some people's hip joints, if you're squatting weights, right, some people have their feet flayed out. Some people have them straight ahead, not too many inside, but you watch people walk, you watch their gait. There's all these other factors that come into play. So, you know, for somebody, I was teaching a class one time and I had a lady that took dance and ballet and different types of things. And so we started stretching out and she just took her leg and pulled it up. And it's like, there's nothing I'm going to teach you about stretching, right? So
sure.
maybe she needs to strengthen, right? Maybe she's too stretched out.
Right. But she probably also had a really good mind-body connection. So like a developed athlete doesn't need a lot of the training that we would provide.
Yeah, and she was used to different rhythms and different ways of doing things. So she was a good student. And then it was kind of like, yeah, I kind of bored her, right? Because she was a natural, right?
Yeah.
And
so I like that you use the word example related to the stance, because I think, like, I don't even remember how the poem is, like, don't mistake the finger for the moon, right? Like, the idea is, I think the examples get caught up, people get wrapped around the examples and forget that the example is one context, one idea, one pressure, one range, and they forget that the example should point to a skill that has a tremendous amount of variety in it, and it's for practice.
Yeah, I had jotted something down, but I can't find it now. But yeah, I think we just need to have per se formulas or something to guide us, you know, of how we do things. And you know, when you look at something, you break it down into its underlying components. And it's kind of like, how do you push pull with your arms, right?
Yeah.
And you know, this also goes into, I think somebody had mentioned, how do you look at throwing, and what are the opportunities to throw, and how do you engage in them and set them up and stuff. And it's like, you know, every time you move, there's an opportunity to either strike, I can't remember how they say it in Chinese, but they're striking, kicking, grappling, and throwing.
Right, T dash Y na, yeah.
Yeah, so most martial arts have those 4 categories, right? And so, you know, when we step, say, in kata, you're stepping in Zenkutsu Dachi and doing a lunge punch, it's kind of like, well, there was a lot of different things that could have happened from A to B. Or when your opponent's stepping in a certain stance trying to do something. You know, it's kind of like we're bipeds, so we're constantly falling. And I think that's one of the things, you know, when you start sliding the feet on the floor and different ways of doing the footwork and that, it's not just a stance, a rigid position. It's how do you get there, right? So sometimes when I look at the katas, it's like, what was the movement before? How did I get there, right? And what am I trying to do now, right? Well, trying to hit him or lock him up or kick him or whatever it was. and where am I going next in the kata? So I think the katas uh, are kind of, you have to have the kihon, the fundamentals, to do the kata, right? Or it really helps. And then the katas kind of show you the strategies and tactics, the preferences of the style or system, right? And then you test those things with the application, the kumite, right? And I think, you know, kakye is a great
platform,
great tool, it gets you touching and gets you a rhythm, you know, when I can go in, when I can go out. So it kind of sets things for you. And, you know, you do with the, some of your courses, you talk about listening. And so sometimes we're so, our thoughts take us to, this is what I want to do, but there's an obstruction. Oh, I can't do it because he's not moving right, or he's not doing this. And so it becomes more about the intuitive with the tactile, becomes more about listening, and it's taking what they give you. And that's kind of the receiving concept, right? So we break up the blocking. It's like, well, there is blocking, but uke means receiving, and there's many ways to receive. Blocking is one of them, but blocking, so one of my goals is defend and control. Blocking can defend, but it usually doesn't control, right? So we have to figure out the angles, the body box, and how these things work. Anyway. So.
Yeah. No, that's great, Sensei. So Randall asked a follow-up question. He said, ultimately, do you feel we need to look as teachers at using look at Western terminology versus Asian terminology and make some determinations there? Like the pros and cons of using certain terminology. You had mentioned earlier that sometimes the terminology gets in the way, sometimes it's helpful. Can you explain more?
Yeah, I think, you know, the terminology, I say they're labels. And once you label something, you kind of limit it. You say, this is what it is. And then everybody, whether or not it's true, everybody says, well, that's all it can be. And that's not true, but you know, I think that's why I look for the concepts, and then I go by, you know, what's the perception, what's the perspective, how did they filter it? The kanji is a good, they're stories, they're poems, they're concepts, right? And so if you look at it like that, yeah, there's a difference in the way the Asian and the Western mindset is. But I think, you know, that's why it's important that if you look at per se violence at its core, it hasn't changed. You know, martial arts is kind of a study of violence, but also of anatomy, of physiology. You know, that's why everybody loves the bubishi. It's like, oh, there's herbs and there's, you know, all these different things. But so when you start training, if you don't know how, that's one of the things in principal development, the three gates and the three segments. It's like, how do these things work? What does this tool do, right? What does this tool do? What does this tool do? So once you're able to go from where you're at, and there's an old saying, when the hand goes out, it strikes 3 times. It's like, well, that tells me just like you're blocking, and this is the impe. Well, by labeling the impe, which we need to have labels so we can communicate, but there's a lot of things that are happening. I might be hitting the head. I might be poking the eyes. I mean, some people do it like this. Some people do it like this. So, you know, these things about everybody doing it the same way, this is not structurally comfortable for me, right? But this is, and it drops everything down, right? It drops the lat, the pec, all that. So if you're doing this, it's like, well, you really don't have the skill up because you can't change it. And, you know,
Would you mind turn sideways just a little bit to show it to you? No worries.
So instead of being perfectly straight, right? And then you have some people that are down, you have some people that are up. Oh, be careful because you might get pushed back. Well, it depends. Maybe I'm in Shiko and I'm trying to reach for their chin, right? Or maybe I'm using it to stab, or maybe it's an inside cross block and I'm using it for an elbow break or an elbow trap or something. So,
right.
You know, I think it's looking at, again, look at the concept, and it's about violence. And
Yeah.
the way I think about it is I want to defend and control.
Mm-hmm.
So if it doesn't meet that criteria, and I got to do 5 movements to get there, if I block this hand and then transfer and go all the way to the other side, was that necessary?
Mm-hmm.
Unless it was necessary. So
Right.
anyway.
Fantastic, Sensei. So you're very focused on Gojou. I think you're a Gojou specialist, deep study. I cross-train in some other arts and even look to get certifications and those things just to indicate the level of practice I've had. But I know you study a lot of things. So you mentioned physiology, biomechanics, healing approaches, those things. Can you talk more about those things that you do study, why you study them, and kind of how they enhance your understanding of Gojou?
Yeah, I think it's just my way of getting outside the box and recognizing that, you've seen this a lot before, but the human body only bends or can do certain things. I mean, it's kind of like writing, we all have the same alphabet, painting or art, we all have the same colors. So we all have the same, we all bend, lunge, twist, pull, rotate, whatever. So based on those types of things, it's kind of like I watch dance, I watch judo, jiu-jitsu, I watch weapons, I watch all these things because there's a lot of different disciplines that have a core of movements that are the same. So we've talked about one of the aha moments was quit studying techniques. It's like, is my hand open? Is my thumb back? Is it closed? Is whatever. It's like, study the movement, because this movement happens a lot. And so pretty soon it just becomes, here's a circle this way, and here's a circle this way. When am I entering and when am I exiting? So from a high inside block, it's like, well, I entered maybe here and there.
Right, at the 11 o'clock position or something.
And down, it's kind of like, well, so here's that entry here, and here's also the entry for the down block, right? Or a punch or whatever. So, and then the coordination is a big thing too. The body development coordination is like different ways of generating power. Or the hip and shoulder moving together. So you have this travels 2 feet. The shoulder and hip only travel probably about 3 or 4 inches, but it's coordinating that, right? And then maybe the hips forward one time with the shoulder, and next time the hips back. You're holding the hip back, like you've showed in a lot of your videos. So that's really informing. It's kind of like there's many different ways to do things, but pick one, develop it, and then it's hard sometimes to get a concept or whatever if you don't have anything to compare it to. So start with something,
right,
and then build from there, and then you realize, oh, it's just like this, or it's just like that. So I go back to we'll be in Shikodachi and we'll do this, and then we'll be in Zenkutsu. In the book there's some pictures of that, right? So the upper extremities, lower extremities, and the torso, there's 3 things that are happening. There's a stance, the hands are doing, or the arms are doing something, the legs are doing something, or you're twisting or you're not twisting. So they're just,
So you look at it from a very generalized athletic biomechanical perspective, and then tie that back to what we're doing specifically in the style.
It's the same, only different.
Right. So. I know you study the kata, the Gojou kata, very, very deeply. You train many ways. Can you tell us about both how you study the kata, what some of the results of that are, and kind of what your relationship with the kata is? Like, how do you think of them in the totality of what karate is? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I wrote down some notes.
Sure.
So the kata, again, if you look at it from the perspective, it's just a thing. has most of the kata probably have a high percentage of the same techniques done in a different way. So an aha moment was looking at them in a metaphorical sense. It's a story.
Okay.
Everybody loves stories.
Sure.
And it's the old.
It's kind of how culture has been passed down for thousands of years,
Yeah.
right? Through stories.
But it doesn't matter how I tell you the story. It's how you filter and perceive those things that you've learned or that I tell you, right? And so it's that game we play in school where I whisper something in your ear. And by the time
So what's my perception of it?
20 people down,
Yeah.
you know, the cat, it started out as a white cat and it turns into a brown cow. And it's kind of like, so, so I look at it like that in stories. And so it's good to look at the past, go back, and but just recognize that it was based on their perception, their perspective, and preferences, right? I mean, we all change things. I like to do it better. So nobody likes to work on the hard stuff. Everybody likes to work on what they do well, right? So
based on their abilities.
And over time, it changes things. Like, but what benefits you may not benefit somebody else. So again, that's going back to looking at the student, trying to meet them where they are, make sure they get fed.
Yeah.
But you have however many students you have that many mouths to feed. And they need to realize, you mentioned something earlier. I remember my teacher used to walk down the line and say, we'd be doing front snap kicks, and he'd say, get your knee up higher. And all of a sudden, 20 people have their knees up higher. And he's like, no, get your knee down. He's like, well, you just told him to get his knee. It's like, you were doing it right. So sometimes it's specific. You have to make sure, and especially, you were mentioning with all the online stuff you do. You got 10 people on the screen, and everybody changes it, right?
Well, it's helped me realize that I always have to continue working on my communication. And my natural inclination is to say, lift your hand higher, Kevin. What I need to do is slow down a little bit and say, Kevin, get Kevin's attention. This is for you. Here's your adjustment, right? Or, hey, everybody stop, everybody watch, everybody pay attention to this because nobody's really doing this piece right. So it helps me tailor my communications a little bit.
Yeah, and I hear that a lot on the internet. A lot of teachers that people enjoy learning from, they explain it in a way that they can understand it. So it's not about the teacher, what they can do. It's about transferring the information and helping you to develop your way of doing something. And it may not be the way that I like, but it's kind of like if you block and it was a bad block, but you didn't get hit, it's like, I don't know, it was good for me.
Right. I mean, ultimately, utility kind of trumps aesthetics and tradition and other things if you care about the art being useful. Right?
Well, a lot of people, I used to look at the Chinese arts, and it's kind of like it, the Japanese Okinawa and some of the other arts are so linear, right? But it is from A to B. It's like, okay, this is what they're doing. When you see some of the Chinese arts, and you see all this rolling, and it's kind of like, I don't even know where to start. It looks like a ball of string.
Sure.
But there is a lot of structure. And, it's kind of watching. Now I might get in trouble here. So.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. You often say in kata, you're only fighting gravity. Tell us more.
Yeah. So that's a reason that you should, do the testing and self-examination. Kata looks great, but there's no resistance beyond gravity. There's no resistance beyond you programming your body. Hey, I'm turning right. Your proprioception, your vestibular system, different things like there's not a whole lot of I want to say stuff going on. So it's pretty much dependent on just keeping your balance, maybe some agility training in that. But you really can't test it, and that's the same thing online. It's like I can teach you how to, or show you how to move. I don't know that I teach anybody anything. I can show you how to move, but I can't. You need to put the resistance to it, right? So, we have these drills. We talked about solo, stationary, partner, adding resistance, cooperative, different things like that. You have to take those out of consideration. But the kata itself, again, pretty much shows one application. There's nobody that's pushing you to go faster or
right.
making you do things that. And so then we take that and we try and put it in prearranged forms, and then it's good that it starts to fall apart. Because then we say, okay, well, I don't want to move to the right, because if you start getting into the thoughts that you have to have one technique for every situation, you got a lot of techniques that you got to learn, and plus the processing in the OODA loop. You talk about a couple things, but it's like I'm constantly watching. It's like, what do I do here? I got to go through this list, right? A supercomputer of different things that could happen, or I could do. And the other thing is, with the OODA loop is recognizing that if if somebody's confronting you, they're already at 4. So if you have observe, orient,
decide and act,
they're already acting. And you're stuck at the first one. So every time they move, you're reacting. And I like to separate the difference between reacting and responding, right? If you're reacting, they're always going to be ahead of you, right? So that's where the after, during, and before concept, the value of those. You got to get out of that loop. You have to respond, and that's like, you've thought about it, or, it's that intuitive. If there's a punch coming up, I'm going to do something. But then when my hands are there, it's kind of like we start talking about 2-on-1. Well, that's bad. It's kind of like, so from here, it's got to separate and start doing something else, right? Once you gain control.
So just back to that idea of fighting gravity for a second with a kata, since it's solo and you're only really responding to gravity in that scenario. I've noticed that one of the things that you've helped me with, and other people that I've watched you teach, is one of the first things you help them with in their kata. Not that you're trying to change the kata, but one of the feedback mechanisms is just to apply some forward or backward pressure to stances as they move through the kata, presumably because in a fight, you don't just get to move around without it being opposed.
So I go back to Sanshin and Tensho, if those are the foundations. We have some drills that we do, but the first thing that I think is natural to happen when you're bracing for impact is that you drop down. So we talk about Sanshin, right, and staying in the middle. So when I'm in Sanshin, I should be able to still drop down or pop up. When my hands are here in this frame, right, it just means that I can still pull back or I can still push out. So if my hands are out here, I don't have any more to give.
That's like standing all the way up. Okay.
So you got a vertical and a horizontal, and then pushing and pulling with that, but you can't test that in the kata. And so different ways. Shime is good, but shime to me is the mind. It's like, don't worry about getting hit, right? You're still in the game. But some of the other things can't. It's kind of like clay. We're testing, are the muscles tight? Are they this or that? And that's one way of doing it. I also look at the kata and other things. There's a conditioning phase, and then there's the application phase, right? There's a conditioning, the structure, all these things. So unless you actually start to apply it. So I need to have brace for that impact. Well, how do I do that? I bend my knees down, right? But I don't want to stay down for too long, because studying anatomy, physiology, things, we realize that it's also about isotonic isometric. But if you hold your arm or your leg in that position, if you're tight, and you stay there for 10 or 15 seconds, you don't have any spring. You have to relax everything. So it's not good to, but there's other things that Sanshin teaches. But yeah, I just think you have to test it. If you go back being the teacher, you also, and an educator, you also need to be able to know how to test and what is the goal of what you're, what is the skill you're developing. It's like, well, every time you go. So it's just as simple as in kata, you'll see a lot of times, I get in trouble here for just a second, but you'll see people just move, right? And so if I'm trying to move somebody, I'm bending, right? So dropping down, just a short example of that type of thing. If I'm pulling, do I pull with my arm or am I pulling with my body?
Right.
Am I pulling with my hand?
Right.
And, you know, you'll see all these different arrangements of the hands. And, you know, some people say here, some people say here, some people say here. It's like, well, are you grabbing or are you hooking? You know, there's a lot of things taken into consideration. So I think to inform a student and per se a proper way, you have to have some knowledge of all those things. It's like, well, we get back to the labels. It's like, am I shaving? Am I scraping? Am I stripping? And it's like all those things have little nuances, right? And it's kind of like, well, I'm not doing this. I'm not blocking it, right? I want to get it. So,
right.
Anyway.
We often talk about families of techniques. It's basically like the idea of there being an example, but also a lot of related examples that stretch.
Yeah, Sensei, I got that from you and the 5A, but it's kind of like, a lot of these techniques that you do, you know, Yoryuke or Mawashiyuke, you know, there's a lot of stuff in here, right? And, you know, the study of Tensho, and it's kind of like you're coming in, you're coming out, you're going back, you're hooking, you know, so when I see people doing it really, nothing wrong with doing it fast, but when they start out, it's like, okay, I don't know what that was, but right, or I'm trying to watch the structure or whatever, but you know, if you have it down, or if that's the way you practice, that's one way of practicing it. And then it's kind of like, well, what is my hand? What's my structure? How do I make contact? What happens when I do make contact? So there's a lot of things happening there. When I'm pulling, I'm probably coming down. When I'm pushing, I'm probably floating, but I can also drop and push, right? So those are big, the spit, float. So I think those are also in there, and they're so minute that a lot of people don't pick them up. You know, they kind of do the or if I get my feet, if I step faster, then I won't have to worry about getting caught in between. But that's when the sweeps and the takedowns happen, right? It's kind of like, you're not stable, right? So you have to have understand your base of support, your area of support. If you understand that about yourself, then you'll also understand. It's like, when you look at somebody, and that's the way I look at katas, which is what is your questions. It's kind of like, where's my weight distribution at? Am I moving forward in this technique of the kata? Am I moving back? What are my hands doing, right? Am I twisting? Am I turning? You know, a quick example of Geeksai, it's like, you know, I punch, and we come all the way back here, and then we expose our shoulder and our head. It's like, so looking at it, it's like I would rather block in front of me, right?
You're talking about like movement number 3,
Yeah.
right? High block punch, low block.
But if I'm taking the person with me, then I don't want to stay over here. There's a reason that I'm doing it, right? But, and again, kata only shows one variation, so if your instructor shows way back all the way around in a circle, then he's probably thinking, hey, I got this guy and I'm taking him with me, right? And that goes into Aikido and Judo and a whole bunch of other things, grappling. So I just think the instructor from an educational view should be able to, who are you teaching? What do they need? You have to be able to feed them. And if they're not getting fed, then kind of doing them a disservice, or point them to somebody who can. You know, I've heard a lot of people say, hey, you need to go train with so-and-so, or train this one. Oh, who's a good Kobudo instructor, or who's a good this or that? Hey, go train this, right? And we're all pretty much doing the same stuff, but we've just kind of preferences, stylistic.
I don't mean to take this in a negative way or present this in a negative way, but in your experience coming up in Gojou and looking around at people you've been teaching or schools you visited, workshops you've executed on, what do you see some of the biggest challenges or limitations in the way Gojou has been taught? And how do you, what are your top pet peeves there, and kind of what do you recommend to solve those problems?
Yeah.
I mean, without naming names, right? It's not about names, right? So many of us have come up in the same set of problems.
Yeah.
Not all the same, but similar.
Yeah. So I think it's the methodology. I had mentioned earlier, we begin by teaching the way we've been taught,
right?
Whether it's our parents or environment or whatever, or our teachers. And if our teachers say something, it's the shuhari thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know any better, so he says this works, it works, right?
Right.
So the testing is another thing.
Mm-hmm.
Some tests, some dojo that's like, no, that's a no-no. That's taboo. Don't ever ask am I ready to test, right? Or
sure.
Hey, I need to test. And separating the Western and the Asian thought, how we teach. I don't believe there's bad methods and this and that, but I just think we need to break them down and figure out what are the goals, what are we trying to do here, and how does this apply. I've heard a lot of people, usually you go to the culture that the art came from, but if you look through history again, we've all had pancreation in Greece, India, some of the names I can't even pronounce, but everybody's had some type of wrestling or grappling or striking, China, but it's kind of like the gladiators, the twist, bite, the whole thing. And then we started getting rules, and it's like, well, you can't.
Right.
And so it's the same thing in the dojo, right? If you train too hard, nobody wants to come, right? And then there's, individual differences. If you're older, train as hard as you can for as long as you can, but moderation, be smart about it. If you hurt yourself, it just takes that long to come back, or maybe you don't come back. So we need to take care of each other. But so just those types of things. I think.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So I like your focus on how context matters, your goals matter, right? Yeah. So there are many ways of training, many benefits of training. Yeah. They all apply to us differently at different times in our lives, and so that context is king.
Yeah, I think it just continue, cast about the search earnestly, right, with patience, and you don't need to get it all in one day, but it's about fortitude, and they always say the mind, body, and spirit, but maybe the character, and it's a huge process.
Yeah.
But I think the people, I think we have a passion, and if you don't have a passion for it, then it's just kind of a side thing. I used to get upset when I taught at the YMCA's, and parents would come in, and it's like, are they ready to test, or how come they're, because soccer season's coming, and football and baseball season's like, am I really competing with other sports? It's like, this should be, it's kind of a passion, a way of life for us, anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sensei. Can you tell us about the Kokonden, your organization? What's the words mean, and what's the goal of your organization?
Yeah, I was trying to summarize it, but so it basically translates into transmission of old and new traditions.
Right. So Ko is old, like Kobudo.
Right.
Kan is new, and Den is tradition.
Yeah, and there's a lot of this. I mean, it's drawing from the old, and that's kind of the base that was set by our predecessors, and so we're drawing from those things, and hopefully, when it's our turn to bring it forward, that we'll continue to discover in that. A lot of people talk about it's not a complete system, or it's not. Most of the stuff is in the process of being developed. Miyagi Sensei, Taguchi Sensei, a lot of the other Funakoshi and all that. I mean, we look at them as the experts, and they were, I believe, but in their own ways. But they were still developing too. So we need to. Well, when I was there, he was doing it like this, and nothing ever changes. And then all of a sudden, you realize that it's constantly changing, and that's a constant. Change is always constant. And so, are you studying a live art or a dead art, right? And so I think that we learn from those types of things. And so the Kokunden, it's kind of like the logo is a manji, and it's got four, it turns. And so it's just that changing, and the yin and yang, and a lot of other things. But things change, and I think that we should be vigilant about being aware of different things. And I looked at the story by Hanshi Patrick McCarthy about Matsuyama Park, and sometimes people don't want other people to know that you went and trained here, or you went and trained there. But I think it shows an openness to learn, to be a student. And, everybody's got something to say, but if these guys, supposition is that they did probably meet each other and train with each other, and we have some documentation of those things. And so I think that you need to get with a group, a community of practice, a community of truth. Like, you have to be able to agree to disagree. You have to be able to exchange information and do. And some people are a little bit more secretive than others. It goes back to the dojo, the inside and outside students, and that. It's like, I don't know if you want to teach somebody who doesn't have the character how to hurt people.
Right.
So it might be more about conditioning and exercise. And we all know that if I've seen people take full-on hard punches and kicks, and then for some reason they didn't go down, right? And then other ones, it's kind of like, I just threw my hands up. You scared me, and I hit you, and
It's
you're
a
dead.
knockout.
You fell. So it's different. But I think that's what it's about. Hopefully, I used to ask my teacher who he trained with, and he said, well, some of the guys that he went through, had met other instructors and that, but most of the time it was us. We were teaching him through him watching us and figuring things out.
But he didn't have a cabal of senior instructors he went off to go do his training with.
So, and we've been able to do that. We've had a lot of the seminars you've had, and I've had. We've had teachers here, which is great.
Almost exclusively.
I'm excited about it, because it's like we get to watch them, and it's like, we're here to throw out some concepts, and there always has to be kind of somebody in control and in charge, so it doesn't turn out into chaos. But some of the seminars and things like that, it might be a 2-day seminar or whatever it is, a 4-hour seminar. But a lot of times we get more information by sitting down and having a discussion for 10 minutes with somebody, and they say, it's like, oh, wow. Right. So, I like those, that community of practices. We're doing the same things. We come from different walks of life. How do we look at this? What's our perspective, our perception, our abilities, things like that. So I think that's a great way to learn, by being able to. And, sometimes you might say something, or somebody else, that I don't understand, but I'll play with it. It might take me 6 months to say, I'm thinking you were right about that. But you give me the latitude or the space to say, you don't have to, you got to do it this way. You got to, so if you don't get it, you don't get it, right? But down the road, you say, 20 years later, that's what my teacher was saying, right? Or,
that's that humility coming back to get you.
So the experience are good, but there's a lot of people with a lot of things, a lot of stuff to teach. And we just have to be open to it and listen sometimes rather than talk.
So. So I just want to talk about a couple things, and Sensei, I'd like you to wrap us up. We're almost at 90 minutes, so I think it's good to work towards a close here. You know, I'm very happy that the Burinkan is a member of the Kokonden. You know, I continue to learn from you about Gojou consistently, and I really appreciate the approach. I mean, I've been lucky enough to train with some really amazing teachers, and I put you right at the top, and just find myself very lucky to have you geographically available and having more time to be available as well. So super appreciate that. A lot of people. So if anybody wants to contact Sensei to discuss more about the Kokonden, you can find the Kokonden on Facebook. I think kokonden.org is a website. I think your email address is there through Facebook, or contact me. I'll put you in touch directly with Sensei. We do Kokonden events here in Nebraska as well. There's one coming up in April or so.
Yeah,
I believe.
Nebraska.
Yeah, so those are great. And again, it's a really deep study of Gojou. So anyone interested in Gojou, or just any other style, but we usually use Gojou as the example, I will say.
Yeah, and it's not, so there's a lot of lineages of Gojou. It's not lineage specific, it's not style specific. A lot of things that we do, you know, the concepts and principles, stuff like that, they apply to a lot of different things, a lot of different, different areas. So I don't have a dojo. I train with, at the Burinkan with Sensei Russ Smith, and he's been very, very good about training and sharing. And we have the lab. We come in here sometimes and do probably more talking, but then we put it into the process. And so you know, it's getting harder and harder. The difference between the Asian and the Western, it's you know, a lot of those dojos have been established. A lot of dojos have closed down. The brick and mortar thing seems to, as technology and life changes, a lot more people are training out of their garages or basements or parks, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as you continue to train. Again, one of the keys, you don't have to have 20 or 30 people. You take on that responsibility, right? But it's good to have a partner, somebody you can go play with or talk to and have coffee.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Thank you, Sensei. Yeah, I mean, this dojo is your dojo anytime you need it. So we appreciate having you here and having you around, and the opportunity to learn and train with you. Not many people know yet, Sensei did a 6-month course on Gojou, a very deep dive about all aspects of Gojou, including the Kata. I think it's 26 lessons. You can reach out to Sensei. It is primarily a lecture format, but you're going to find a ton of information because it's lecture plus demonstration. So it's not a workout video course. Really get your notepad out, that kind of thing. But contact Sensei to get that. I guarantee you will find many, probably hundreds of enlightening tips about Gojou training, study, and practice of the Kata. I know I did. I
have an overview of the 26 lessons. They're about an hour long, and so you can kind of look at the topics, and you can kind of pick and choose. They're all 12 kata of Gojou and some other things, but there's demonstrations and different things. So if you're interested, reach out.
Excellent. Any final thoughts you'd like to give us? Anything that we didn't cover?
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity and to do this.
I appreciate you so much, Sensei. You're a great teacher and great friend. Be well, everybody. Take care.